This conversation was a joy. I felt very comfortable discussing many ideas with Robert Lee, a good friend of mine. His perspective on music, life, and his optimistic view on many different things was quite enlightening to me. Although I like to revel in the darkness, Robert always chases the light. I hope you enjoy this video and explore many things about the inner workings of Robert Lee's brain and broad concepts about music and the creation of art.
Hello.
Hello.
Thanks for being here.
Thank you for having me. This is awesome.
Yes, everybody, this is Robert Lee. He's a fantastic composer, band leader, bassist, a good friend of mine, and he has many talents that we're going to talk about today, and lots of things to cover.
Wow, what an introduction. Thank you for having me.
Yes.
Yeah, this is really exciting.
Please tell me, what have you been up to lately?
Oh man, so I have a new album that's being released in January. Yeah, it's very exciting. It's my third full-length album. It's been yeah, it's been an incredible journey to in terms of like writing and like releasing this music. It's entitled Forbidden West, and it's combines kind of my jazz roots, but also exploring a lot of my Korean heritage. So there's a lot of Korean traditional influence in it, and yeah, it's all original music, and I'm super excited to share it with everyone. So that's
Wow.
kind of been my thing the last little while musically, but also yeah, I've been still trying to be very active in the Toronto jazz scene, playing gigs and like join my friends in a lot of different projects, and yeah, it's been great.
Wonderful. You recently released a new single off of your new album.
Yeah.
Can you tell me a little bit more about that one?
Yeah, so I just recently released it's called Wa Ariran, and yeah, it's been that was a really cool kind of idea that kind of came up. Just again, it's kind of really tries to combine like a lot of traditional Korean elements. So it features my good friend Sana Lee, who's a pansori singer. So pansori is a style of like traditional Korean like operatic music. And it also features my friend Royal Lee, who's a kayagum player, which is a traditional stringed instrument that you play like a line, like it kind of lies down and you plug it and stuff. And it's been really cool. I actually for a while I was taking lessons with her to learn not only about the instrument and kind of getting technical facility on it, but also just also it was my first kind of maybe not my first, but it was kind of like also a part of my continuing journey to learn more about what traditional Khmer music sounds like and how it is and kind of the stylistic elements of it. And so with that kind of journey, and like it kind of came together to also combine it with a lot of my musical upbringing, which was like jazz music. And so combining those two, it kind of ended up producing this song that I'm really proud of.
Amazing. I'm very curious about how, for one, your interest in exploring your Korean heritage and how you initially thought to go about doing that. Where do you start to dive deep into your Korean heritage in terms of music?
Yeah, so I think a lot of it began really when I was about to do my master's degree. I went to Berkeley in Valencia, and around that time I was I was during COVID. I went in 2020, and I really wanted to try and use an opportunity to kind of like what like explore my kind of Korean background. I was born and raised in Canada. Grew up, in London, Ontario. Then I moved to Markham, and went to Humber and Guelph, and yeah, and I just guess it gave me an opportunity to kind of be like, okay, where did I come from? Where did my parents come from? My grandparents, and so I began reading a lot of these Korean folk stories. I found this book. I just had a bunch of this collection of like Korean folk stories, and reading that, it kind of became. I was like, oh, this is like really interesting, and using I think music and art as kind of a pathway into learning more about my background. I found it was such a great opportunity to kind of like begin something and like develop my kind of artistic identity. And so my second album, Charan, was an album where all the compositions were based on these certain stories that I read. And it just kind of went from there, and I was really inspired by, my Korean heritage, but also the music that came out of it. And I thought it was so interesting, where a lot of it's kind of like through an oral tradition, but there's all these interesting melodies that came out with
Mm-hmm.
it, and just like their use of what we would call maybe like quarter tones, or like those that kind of like sonic um landscape was really fascinating to me. And so what became from that, from this my second album, into learning the Kaigum, and then learning more about Korean traditional art forms and music, like it kind of, and growing from there. And I felt, and through this journey, I felt a lot more connected, or was starting to get a lot more connected with like my background. I've just been really fascinated by it, and I think it's something that I've always been trying to straddle. I realized through this journey, and with this album that's coming out, this kind of balance between my Korean Canadian identity, like not, maybe not feeling fully Canadian because of how I look
Mm.
and like my upbringing, but also not fully Korean. And so it was a really interesting kind of balance between the two. And but I think now more so than ever, I feel so strongly Korean, but also strongly Canadian. Like that's
Mhm.
just who I am, and just kind of embracing that has allowed me to kind of be very inspired and to create a lot like art that is very honest and very reflective of who I am.
Mm-hmm. It, listening to your music, I often find it feels like you take the listener on a journey, and it feels like we navigate large landscapes and we reach a destination that we didn't know existed until we got there. Do you feel like your music coincides with your journey of defining who you are?
Yeah, in some ways, like I think I've been very always musically inspired by things that really just like very simply put, just like I find beautiful. So,
Mm-hmm.
for example, like I've been so inspired by Studio Ghibli movies. Movies like Spirited Away, Princess Mononoke, Howl's Moving Castle, and I just fell in love with that kind of art style where the narrative storytelling is so beautiful and captivating, but it's also in parallel coincides with like the just these the beautiful imagery and artwork that these movies portray. And then with that, also the music by Joe Hisashi is just brings out so much humanness and beauty that I really respond well to. And so I always try and like, this as just one example, like try to draw from that and these art forms that really inspire me. And I think, yeah, it does kind of coincide with like I just like trying to recreate that imagery, maybe not necessarily with like visual elements, but musically. If I could capture that musically, then I think I'm expressing myself very honestly.
Mm-hmm. You going to Humber, we went to Humber, and one of my biggest takeaways when it came to learning jazz and studying that music was the appreciation of the individual. That was drilled quite strongly in our first year, going through some of the history of the jazz greats. I find that when it comes to jazz music, in appreciating the individual, there comes a lot of isolation, as much isolation as there is in the study of our instrument as an individual, there is in equal parts connectedness to the community and the music that we share with other people. I'm curious, in your time at Humber, how did studying jazz help define who you were? And then how has that changed after your time at Humber?
Yeah, I think I came into jazz actually quite late. Like I was, I think, 17 or 18 when I first started studying it,
Mm.
and then I ended up going to University of Guelph and trying to like hone my skills there, and then want to focus a lot more on performance, specifically jazz performance. I ended up going to Humber. I think what I discovered a lot through my time there was, one, just gain obviously a technical facility on my instrument, but also I was really drawn by the improvisational demand of what jazz is, like
Mm.
where it's based out of. And I think through improvisation, there's just so much freedom to express on like who you are as an individual and what you want to say, like when you're improvising or soloing. And so, yeah, through that, I learned a lot, obviously, understanding it's so important to understand, where the music came from. So studying the greats, whether it's like Chris McBride, but also like Ray Brown, Paul Chambers, Ron Carter, but a saxophonist, Wayne Shorter, John Coltrane, et cetera, et cetera. Um, I found that when they're improvising, like yes, they draw a lot of like the same, like a lot of these like you call it like musical tropes that's part of jazz, like the language of like bebop or whatever it is.
Right.
But then I think by the end of my time at Humber and afterwards, at a certain point you have to start thinking like, okay, what do you have to say? And so yeah, you can, mimic or like whatever, like a lot of these greats and stuff, which is amazing. But I've found that like I feel like I could express myself more if I kind of trying to find my own voice. And to do that, it's like what do you want to say creatively as an individual? You have to draw on like a lot of different parts of your musical identity and your life. So like, oh, what music do you like? Oh, I love folk. I personally love folk music, so I really love those like folk melodies and stuff like that, and like the strength of a melody and what that has to say. And but also like, with like harmonic density or maybe not so much harmonic density, I find that like there's wherever you play or compose, there's a story that you or a message you want to convey. And so like how do you capture that? And there's many ways to capture that, but you have to find that out yourself and through your own individuality. And so that's why I kind of found where like doing with Humber, I was able to kind of hone my skills, understand a lot more of the language, like understand where this music came from, and then using jazz as kind of like the foundation to write and compose and perform and improvise allowed me to kind of grasp onto other aspects of my life to get to a point where I feel like I could say what I want to personally say.
You conducting your band, how do you present this hybrid music that you're trying to accomplish, and how do you share that with the band to help to make sure that they're on the same page as you? I'm assuming that they often come from a jazz background, so they're able to execute. But how do you get them in the same mentality that you have when it comes to writing and sharing
Yeah.
your music?
Yeah, I think a lot of it comes from like, what I was talking about, like trying to convey something visually without like a visual like reference. And like, well, like literal visual reference, like when we're creating music, like, there's just like at a base level, there's just sounds, but really it's like when I try and compose music, I'm trying to tell stories. So I always try and inform my band members, like, oh, like you could play you're playing the notes on the page, but really this is like the feeling that I want, or like the visual, like think about like, like a cloud or wherever it is, or like a mountain or like this sort of setting. And that that reveals a lot, at least for me, but I think also with my bandmates, gives them a lot of perspective on like what this piece is about and like what it should mean. And maybe it's not so, maybe they can interpret it slightly different ways, but yeah, a lot of it is kind of giving them that reference, that visual mental reference. And so that they can kind of, you know reach into what the piece is about, and then express that through their instruments. And then as a team, we're trying to like reach this goal. And so like I think it's a lot of coaching like that. You like anyone could play like really like you give them the sheet music or whatever and they can play the notes and stuff, but really capturing that feeling is like something that I think, as a band leader, it's my responsibility to convey as much as possible and to try and inform them.
Yeah. Have you talked to other band leaders or composers who are trying to do a similar thing with other cultural backgrounds?
That's a good. Let me think. Um, I don't know. Probably, but I'm trying to think. Like, what? Actually, there was some. I was in connection with someone. She was based out of Boston. She's a pianist, and she was kind of doing something similar too, where she was using a lot of like Korean traditional music and instrumentation and mixing it with jazz. And listening to her music and reaching out to her was really inspiring. And yeah, I thought that was really interesting. I think when it comes down to it, like, um, I think there's so much creative opportunity when you start exploring kind of like different worlds, like musical worlds. When I was at Berkeley, was something that I was really inspired by was like flamenco music, and how a lot of the jazz musicians there were combining flamenco music with jazz. I thought that was so interesting because flamenco has its own like stylings and like its rhythm, especially the rhythms. And I thought that was such a cool thing. And I think what really inspired me from my time there was like, oh, like there's so much opportunity to kind of dive into different worlds. Like you can use jazz as like as the basis or not, but just kind of like letting yourself be able to have the flexibility to kind of explore different genres and then try and manifest something that's quite unique or combines all this stuff is something that helped me kind of propel myself to being a better composer and like diving into again my Korean background.
Right, right. A lot of my guests have mentioned the idea of authentic self, and a lot of the creatives that I've met along the way seem to settle on the idea of finding your authentic self as the overarching goal when it comes to artistic, artistic identity or artistic, challenges. All the work that we're trying to do is an effort to serve our authentic self. I'm curious if you've thought about that or reflected upon that during, I guess, since you started learning music, and how would you describe your authentic self today?
Oh, that's a great question. Yeah. Um, I think a lot of it has to do with like I think looking back on my past, present, and future selves maybe all like at the same time. I think a lot about my upbringing, my background, my musical journey, and then reflecting on that helps influence my present self on like, okay, this is who I am now, I guess. Like, this is the music I listen to. This is the food I eat. This is the people I spend time with. These are my friends. These are my family. These are my responsibilities and priorities. And then looking ahead, it's like, okay, where do I want to grow? And I think it's like these short, medium, and long term goals. It's like I want to always play music. I still love playing jazz, but I also love playing Brazilian music. I love playing country music, and the part of that's too like also the opportunities that come my way, or opportunities I try and put myself to out there, but always trying with this goal of like always trying to learn more and be better, musically as an individual, like as a person. And that all kind of plays into like, okay, if I were to write music now or like my true authentic self as like an artist, let's say, this is what I feel like right now. And it's like I'm not trying to, I guess, be someone or an artist other than that. I just draw on like, okay, how do I feel now? This is what I like. This is what I want to create in this moment. And yeah, and just kind of go from there. And I don't know if that's the right or wrong way to do it, but this is how I feel strongly about like my creative identity and artistic identity.
I've always seen you to be very dedicated and very hardworking when it comes to your music. More often than not, I'd find you shedding than anything else. And I've always respected many jazz musicians' dedication to the craft, to gain their facility on the instruments and explore the music that they need to explore. I'm curious, how has what is your relationship with the work needed to accomplish the musical goals that you're setting out for?
Yeah, it's interesting. The shedding part, like obviously at Humber, it was such a high intense learning environment, and there's so many demands to kind of get things together like quickly. And so I was trying to, which I don't necessarily regret. Like I don't necessarily regret like putting the work into learning, and practicing a lot during my time at Humber. After school in general, like obviously it gets hard. Like there's a lot of life responsibilities and stuff. But I really reflect on like some teachings that my professor had when I was at Berkeley. His name's Matthew Baker. He was probably one of my biggest influences in my musical journey. I was so glad that I got to learn from him. And he told me it's like the best way to like. He essentially said, "I want you to get to a point where you don't need a teacher anymore, where you can start teaching yourself." And I thought that was such a powerful thing that I took away from. It's like, okay, how do you get better when you don't have someone telling you what to do? And I think that's a lot like part of it is like as you keep playing with people or as I keep writing music, you have to have a lot of self reflection, a lot of humility to kind of like understand. It's like, okay, what do I really need to work on? And those things will reveal themselves to you. It's like, oh, like I'm not really good, at playing swing, let's just say, or it's like, oh, I'm not very good at like Cuban music. It's like, oh, well then that actually could be something you're working on. Or like, was learning a lot of classical music during my master's degree, and not that I'm like an amazing classical musician, but I feel like I'm way better than I was before. And but that was something that I was like, oh, I want to get better at this. So I was like, I'm gonna find classical pieces. I'm just gonna start playing them, and then with the tools and techniques that I learned during my schooling, like I'm able to teach myself like, okay, what do I have to do? Like, why is this not sounding the way it is? It's like, and then identifying those things and then working on them. And also with the understanding that, music's like a lifelong journey, and there's always going to be something new to learn or something to get better at. A lot of my musical heroes, that's how they think. They're always practicing.
Yeah.
I remember, I don't know if I told you this, Pat LaBarbera, who was one of our professors at Humber, who retired in my last year. I remember talking to him near the end. He's like, "Oh, like what are you gonna do now?" He's like, "Oh, I just want to practice." I was like, and Pat's like probably one of the best sax players in the world, and it's like that was like really amazing to me. Just like, oh, there's always something to practice. There's always something to kind of get better at, to solidify, and it's always, it's not like a linear thing. You can take 3 steps forward and then like, oh, go back to something, like take 2 steps back and then take another couple steps forward, and it's always this kind of give and go. And so I've always been curious, and also been always very inspired by things that come into my life, whether it's musically or life things that I could always draw from to and then put into like my practice and like musicality.
I really like Mr. Baker's point of view on teaching in that way.
Yeah.
I often share that same philosophy with my students, that my goal, my job as a teacher is to get to the point where my student can teach themselves, where I never have to teach them anything anymore, and they can go on and prosper.
Yeah.
It's akin to like planting seeds and watching a tree grow and bear fruit. I think what's interesting about that process, and why I think I prioritize teaching in my musical career more than connecting to my instrument, is because through that process, I'm able to appreciate the nuance and the beauty of art in a way that is more meaningful to me, that I can share it with more people than I could with my intimacy with my own instrument. Although that I speak in that way, perhaps as an instrumentalist second and a educator first, where I think that you may be an instrumentalist first and all other aspects of your being second, where your connection with your instrument is the way to appreciate the nuances and the beauty of art. And I think that's what maybe Pat LaBarbera recognizes and has always been pursuing, where when he practices, he's able to connect to the nuances of that, which allows him to appreciate the beauty of art in that way.
Yeah, I think, yeah, there's definitely a lot of truth to that. I think, when you're practicing and you're by yourself, one, it takes a lot of discipline.
Yes.
You have to make time for it, and just honestly, like, life gets busy, and sometimes I don't have the 5 hours a day anymore to shed or whatever, 3 or sometimes even 1. But it's dedicating that time. We're gonna set aside. I'm going to work on 2 or 3 concepts and just really dive into it and focus on that. And I think, yeah, it's interesting when I'm practicing, especially when you spend so many hours with like your instrument. Let's say there's so many minute things that I continually discover, and I find those are minute things are ways that I can express myself more. Like, for example, I gain a little technical, like, when I play on my upright bass, or like as a guitar player, like one of the things that Matt Baker taught me, it's like, oh, like, and a lot of it drew from, learning classical music, which was very eye-opening, but it's like, oh, what finger you play, let's say like a G note on a D string, like that has a different feeling and meaning than when you play an open G. Or it's like, oh, and it's like your first finger or second finger, like those have slightly different meanings.
Yes.
And it was so eye-opening to me. And with that, like, it's like when I was working, what am I working on? I was lifted this Avishai Cohen solo, the great bassist, And just like, yeah, there's like a certain fingering, let's say, to like get this get the same, get the notes or whatever. But it's like, is that what he's doing? Like, how's he achieving it? And like, you could sometimes, if you get really deep, that you can hear what fingerings he's playing because of the minute differences of where he's playing the notes on the string.
Yes.
And I think that's so fascinating. And so I think with like practice, you just can discover so much about the instrument. Like it's almost like limitless.
It really is.
Like, and there's so much stuff you can do. And like, and with that, when you focus on these minute details, then let's say when you improvise, all of a sudden you have like so many different choices on like what you can do and how to express yourself. And always that draws a lot too, like when I'm composing, like oh, like this everything has a meaning, and I think that's very important. Like you can't just flub around and play random stuff. Like maybe you can, but like when you play with, you have that understanding and that intent when
Yeah.
you perform or write music, like you get a lot closer to like expressing yourself, the authentic self that we were talking about.
Yeah, yeah. I love that you mentioned that everything has meaning. It could be every note, every chord, every voicing, every double bar line that you put in Sibelius, every rehearsal mark that you have to consider at editing, how you lay out the parts for all your musicians, and everything has a meaning, absolutely, for sure. I see a lot of parallels with all mediums of art, whether it's painting, poetry, writing, or music, that the world that we're trying to capture is the world that we truly believe to be beautiful. What I find very inspiring by the work that you're doing is you're digging deep into the past as much as you're, you know, uh, venturing forward into the future with the music that you're composing. One thing about music that I truly appreciate, that I've always found um, kind of very significant, is the idea of composition. I started in the classical realm. I played viola and violin in orchestra, and the nuances of every passage and every note was uh, drilled into me to respect the composer. And in the efforts of trying to respect the composer, I had to understand. I was curious to explore, what does it mean to be a composer? What is the intent behind these notes that somebody else wrote that I am now meant to play? And in the process, I found myself to identify more with the composer than the player, where creating something new with intent was the truest expression of beauty. Trusting that the players have a formula to execute the notes. It's like any musician can play the notes, but only a composer can compose in that way. The idea comes from the individual, and your perspective on things as the composer is initially like the most ill-defined thing. It's just a vague idea in the universe until you get into the details, until you actually hear it being played by your musicians, until you mix it for hours and hours off the recording and feel like, yes, this is exactly what I needed. Knowing that there'll always be something that you can change, always be something that wasn't quite right. What I think is very beautiful about you reaching into the past and venturing into the future coincides with my idea of music in general. One reason why I think the medium of music is so powerful and timeless is because this description I have about it. Making a recording is capturing a moment in time, and we do so infinitely because now we can take it out of our time, manipulate it all we want in the recording editing process or composition process, whatever you would choose, and we fine tune it. It's like molding it in an infinite playground of space and time, and then we present it again and play it through time. That experience we have of playing this refined craft of music can only be experienced through time, which is very fitting as you're exploring music that happens to transcend time.
Wow, yeah. Yeah, it's interesting. Like, so I think when it comes to like compositions and stuff, like I think it's so interesting. For one, yes, like respecting the composer and the composition. Like, this is what their intent is and stuff, and this is what the feeling they want to convey and stuff. And yes, like as musicians, it's our responsibility to execute that as truly as possible. But I also think there's a beauty in interpretation as well. And I think it kind of goes back and forth. Yeah, respecting the past and looking towards the future. That sort of balance. And, with learn, like, I think that's why it's so important to learn where like music comes from. Whether it's a classical piece or the Korean traditional music, understanding where that history is, why that history exists. And by understanding that, then I think as artists, it can be it's our responsibility to respect that, but also, interpret it in our own way, because that I think breeds new, exciting things that we could put out into the world. Like, for example, if it's like a classical piece, like we can hear the like, why do people play the same symphony so many times and stuff. Obviously, it's like an amazing composition and stuff, but you can hear two different orchestras do the same piece, and it can sound kind of different. I think that's a really fascinating thing, and it could still, I guess, convey like a certain emotion or message, but it can also feel slightly different as well depending on who's playing it and stuff. And so, I think that's part of the journey of like all this music, is that it's both past, present, and future all at the same time. And yeah, like the musicians who play it, now, or like wherever a piece is, like it can still be very inspiring and very new and like and amazing to like listen to or watch. I had, it's nice when speaking for myself, sometimes, like I play with like try to play with the same group of people, like in my band and stuff. But sometimes, like a new person will come in, and they'll like obviously play. They'll still capture, the same sense in some ways, but they'll also have their own spin on it. And I
Yeah.
think that's still like so refreshing to me and so honorable, to like have people like play my music, but also when they put their own personality into it, that breeds something new and creative as well. So I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing at all, but
Right.
it's something that's quite enjoyable to like participate in.
Yeah, I like that idea of interpretation. I think you definitely, described that quite well. That has been my experience in appreciating classical music in a lot of symphonies that I've seen or been a part of, and the I think there's a spectrum of of that. Classical seems to play within a small spectrum of that discrepancy, but jazz seems to hold it in a larger capacity of interpretation, and it invites a larger capacity of interpretation. But interpretation is the domain of exploration that we appreciate as musicians, whether it's it's the domain of how do I say this? The domain of interpretation is what the musicians, the players appreciate and work within, where the composer sets the tone for the interpretation to have, and it's a symbiotic relationship in that way. Um, I'm curious about how it all comes together in your personal life, because balancing the demands of a musician and the life that you have to live, where is how do I say this? Interpretation. Do you find time to interpret your life?
Well, yeah, I guess like, yeah, it's interesting. Like interpreting my life, I I try to, I guess, like, or maybe consciously or subconsciously, like, um, as day to day, like, you have your tasks and goals that you have to do in that day, and sometimes you have downtime, like, see, I'm driving to work or whatever, or like going wherever, and take maybe some time to reflect on that, and then sometimes I have days where like I don't have much going on, and I take time to think about that as well, and um, yeah, like I I think self reflection is important, and like I think sometimes I have a hard time like find the time to have those to self reflect, and it's not always easy because life gets busy, and like I have a lot of musical responsibilities and things like that, and personal responsibilities and whatever. And it's balancing that. It could be a lot, and um, I think it is a balance between you know taking the time to like learn about yourself, reflect on yourself, understand like who you are at this moment,
Mm-hmm.
the person you want to be, and building goals to work towards that, and then do it.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's with life or like musically, like having those moments of breath
Mm.
are important. And I'm not always the best at it, but I try to. And I think that's important because it all informs who you are as a person and who you want to be
Mm-hmm.
and who you were.
Yeah, yeah. Uh, you describe. So I've noticed a type of rhetoric with very disciplined and dedicated musicians such as yourself that a lot of your actions are goal oriented slash instrumental, like pun intended, that one would only take a break in order to practice some more. One would only eat something, have lunch, so they could practice some more. And it seems that there is such a hyper focus to connecting to your instrument or exploring music, studying music, that comes at a great sacrifice. But it's a sacrifice a lot of dedicated musicians like yourself seem to be very content with in the end. However, it always seems to be at the cost of, I guess, of the personal, of the holistic, of the interpersonal, where the priorities or the landscape of priorities are always within the context of the musical goals to be completed. Is that your experience? Would you agree with my characterization of that?
I think for a part of my life, yes, in a lot of ways. I think a lot, yeah, again, going back to Humber,
Right.
like it was so, again, so intense that, yeah, everything I did was like, okay, it was so that I could practice, so I can, get better at my instrument, understand more music, be more creative, et cetera, et cetera. I think after school, when I have more, feel like, have time in some ways, or like I don't have the time, let's put it that way,
Mm.
to be so hyper focused on music. I find like I developed a balance where it's like spending the time to be learn what I need to do. But I think it's as much as it's important, if not more important, to experience life. And I think life also exists outside of music. It can inform it, and they maybe inform each other.
Mm-hmm.
But it's, I find sometimes the best recognitions for myself on how I'm developing or like my creative state or wherever is when I actually step away from music. I do other things. I go to a nice restaurant. I spend time with friends and family. I go see a concert. I go do other stuff. Like when I have those moments, I find I get, then I come back to music.
Mm-hmm.
I feel so much more inspired, and then I become, I guess, things become clear on like what, let's say, what I have to practice or like what I want to write or what I want to listen to, and or compose or and all that stuff. I think it's like a give and take,
Yeah.
and yeah, and so I think nowadays like I feel trying to be more aware of that balance because I think it's important as like not just like artists but like because we are artists but we're also humans and we're also people
Yeah.
and we in part of our lives with this life we had is to explore and like be curious about things, not just everything has to be so that I could be like an artist or so that I can practice or whatever.
Right.
But doing things honestly and be like, oh, I want to visit a new country because I want to see a new place. I want to experience a different culture and just have it for that and understand that beauty. And then maybe that will inform like, oh, like I was inspired by going on this trip and now I want to write music. Or you could just be like, I enjoyed that because I got to spend it with a loved one.
Yeah.
And that's also meaningful and beautiful. So Yeah, it's just like, understanding that, life is so big and grand, and there's so much, like an infinite amount that we can experience, and that life has to offer to us, good and bad.
Yeah.
And I think that's important to live your life and live it, you know, as honestly as possible.
Yeah. It's such a tough challenge to verify or to consider verifying if a life has been lived honestly and truthfully. I think the whole philosophical notion of trying to define what truth is comes into play. I find that when I make music that is honest, upon reflection, I can describe it as a true acknowledgement of I guess, an experience of life that was truly beautiful. And beauty seems to be the closest thing to truth that I can find. But defining beauty is a is a is a losing game, I guess, because as artists we're always chasing and never actually attaining. Um, but we always keep on trying. And I think the notion the foundation of sacrifice when it comes to artists is in pursuit of that. And however we choose to pursue that, we we have to do so in a productive way. Otherwise, we'll lose steam and we won't have that feedback to kind of mark our moments in time and mark our moments in life where we can acknowledge that. But I think it is in pursuit of that, defining that beauty and being confident that it's as honest as we could probably make it. I'm curious now in your stage in life, what are the things that you're balancing to what are the elements of your life that you're balancing in order to be authentic?
Yeah, it's a tricky tricky one because there's a lot of like, I have works responsibilities, I have musical artistic responsibilities, I have relationship responsibilities, I have friends, I have family, and I think, you know, I don't know if I have like a maybe a true answer to that, but I just try my best where it's like I try and make sure that I have time to spend the moments I have with each of these things and as meaningful as possible. It'd be as simple as just like having coffee with someone, reaching out, having friends over,
Yeah.
writing music, jamming, wherever. And I think, you know, it's it's hard because you don't want to stretch yourself too thin. There's so many things, or else you can't do anything well at all. Um, and I find it's very hard because there's a lot of responsibilities that I have in my life and a lot of things that I'm trying to prioritize, and it's definitely a delicate balance. And sometimes it means, yeah, like I don't practice as much, or I don't write music or wherever, or I'm not playing as much, but I know that at least the time I spend doing other things are still meaningful. And yeah, it's very hard. And you just try your best, I think, and sometimes you have to reevaluate and adjust, but you won't know until like you kind of keep moving forward. And I think, yeah, again, it's like having these goals in the future, but also trying to live in the moment.
Yeah.
And yeah, it's very hard.
Yeah. You say it's very hard quite often. I've heard you use that type of language quite frequently. Do you do you struggle with judgment? Are you judging yourself as time goes on?
Yeah, I think we all like. I think in a lot of ways we all do. We all are critical of ourselves. It's this classic trope. Like as an artist, you're your own worst critic,
Right.
and because you want, I guess, what you want to create or want to express to be meaningful and have some meaning to yourself. And I think when you try to put stuff out there that's you don't feel connected with, then I think you lose that authenticity and stuff. Um,
How do you know that it's meaningful? Are you the right person to even mark that?
well, I guess as a creator, it's like I don't know when let's say like when I write music, it's like, is this how I feel is this conveying the emotion that
Mm.
I want?
Mm.
And sometimes it is simple as like yes or no, and it's like, oh, what I create is like, oh, this means something to me. And it maybe over time, do I still have a connection with it?
Right. Right.
And if the answer is no, then maybe it's not like super authentic, or it's like, or you reflect as like, oh, I was trying to write something in the style of this other artist or that I really like or something, and it's like, but it's not really me.
Mm-hmm.
And I think, yeah, it's a lot of that self-reflection and honesty. And I guess you really only know if what you're doing is authentic.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, again, like that takes a lot of looking at yourself and trying to understand yourself as much as you can, all the good and bad
Yeah.
about it. And when you create something, you hope that that is a piece of you that is being, making more tangible into the world.
Yeah.
But yeah, I guess when I say things are hard, like yeah, because I guess everyone has difficulties in their life and stuff. I'm not um, outside of that.
Mm-hmm.
Like we all have like, and I think that's something we were talking about earlier. Is just like, everyone has their own journey, their own things, and things can be overwhelming and stuff. And it's like balancing between like what can you handle and what can you not at this like the moment and stuff. But I guess try and create goals so that you can handle as much as you can and do things as well as you can. It's not always easy because life throws a lot of stuff at you, and yeah, but I think that's also important because that's part of living. It's part of being in this life and as a human is to go through these trials and tribulations and victories and defeats because they all inform like who you are. And that, but it's I guess with the goal and the mindset that you will come out at the end of it. There's a light at the end of the tunnel, as you could say,
Mm-hmm.
that you will be growing and developing as an individual. And when you look back, you're like, you can think it's like, oh, like how much of that was true at the time, and how much of it is true now. I don't know if that makes sense, but
It does make sense. Yeah, I think what I would add to that, or the perspective I'd like to share on that, is twofold. One, you mentioned about maintaining connection um, to the music, to consider that to be authentic. To do I still have a connection with this music now or tomorrow? I think maybe that idea of questioning if we maintain that connection in its authentic form is a balance that we try to have on through all aspects and dimensions of our lives. Our connection with our family and our friends, our connection with moments that we cherish, and activities that we share with people. Um, that and in trying to do so, and in recognizing so clearly when that connection is faded or when that connection seems fractured, maybe I would describe those moments as being hard because the discrepancy becomes into place. And now all of a sudden we can measure that, what that misconnection is, or that disconnect is, and it becomes so much more apparent. And now all of a sudden we are trying to reconnect. So we're always trying to pull on this rope as if we're falling down and hanging off a cliff, knowing that there's all these threads that require us to maintain. And that's one way I would characterize that. To add, the next part of this is something that I've been discovering lately in my more recent years is, I guess, the idea of grieving. Um, I see music as fundamentally transformative. I, I, I give credit to music to the transformative moments of my life that has helped shape me to become the person I am today, and that gives me the power and inspiration to continue to transform as time goes on. And why I believe I'm more confident to overcome all challenges in life as time goes on is because I've acknowledged that in order to move forward, in order um, uh, to transform, I also have to grieve the loss of who I was yesterday, and that happens with music and it happens with all dimensions of my life. simultaneously. The process of grieving to me is the same process as it is to create. It's sort of the balance of holding on and letting go. It's the balance of birth and death, or those two dichotomies. When I acknowledge something of beauty that I've connected to so deeply, let's say it's a song I create that I believe in, that it truly exemplifies what it is I am feeling in that moment, something that I cherish and something that I find profound. The moment I acknowledge that and I feel that I've connected with it, I let it go. And I let it go knowing that that is the only way for me to move forward. But in doing so, I am now, what is it? It's as if I've given birth to a child, I put it on a boat, and I threw it in the river. Not threw it in the river, but I pushed the boat into the river. Yeah. And now my appreciation of the music is watching that baby on that boat float away, knowing that it may have a chance to live and prosper. But at that point, it's not up to me. It is up to the whatever forces of nature happen to take care of that thing that I created. And the reason why I see it that way, and I see it so, I guess, so tragically, is because it is necessary to acknowledge the tragedy in the finite time we have. By creating music, we've sacrificed the finite time we have for something that could be timeless.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's really amazing. Like, I love that perspective. I think, yeah, I guess connecting on that, I guess, just in like life, like you go, you know, obviously there's things you wish maybe you haven't did. We all have, I guess, a level of regret and like
Just a bit.
yeah, just a little in like our lives and stuff. But like, I think it's kind of like this, yeah, like this. Is it a birth and death thing? Like, I guess if I explore this, like right now, like, I don't know, when I look back, you know, like my 18-year-old self, like, yeah, there's things I will have changed. I wish I understood then, but I didn't. And that's okay though, because now I do. And when you look back, you learn stuff because of these things, not of what happened. And even in the moment, you learn stuff. As like you said, like you're grieving you can grieve your past self or like this past like identity that you had. But I think also too, like maybe the optimist in me is like you also celebrate that as well. There is a celebration to be like, oh, like I was this person, but now I'm here. I thank that person that I was because now I feel like I'm a better version of myself than I was yesterday or a month ago, a year ago, or whatever. And maybe that is the goal of life. Just like try and be a better version of yourself. And I guess with music, it's interesting. Yeah. Like some of my old compositions, you know, obviously, like you said before, like, yeah, there's always things that I want to change and stuff or wish I did better. But that was also what I did at that moment. And there's still value to that. And I'm still proud of what I created or like the art I made at that time because I made it at that time because it had meaning for me in that moment. And I think that what I created at that time, so that now I can reflect on it, it's like, oh, like I feel like I've grown from that, and now I can create things that I feel like are even more closer to myself or more meaningful or more of my authentic self because I gave myself the space and opportunity to put things out there, put things about myself, pieces of my humanity out into art. And now I can create things that are more meaningful, I guess, or closer to who I am. Yeah. And maybe, yeah, that's part of the journey. Maybe it's not grieving the fact that like these things are dead because I don't think they're dead yet. But yeah, but celebrating that it brings more possibilities into my life, into my artistry.
I'm curious about your characterization of the folk tradition. If I were to describe the folk tradition, or maybe just an observation of the folk tradition, of my limited experience with it, are these stories, these songs, these shared communal experiences that happen to correlate with the songs that have stood the test of time because of its long-term vision, because of its honesty. Perhaps the reason why certain folk songs have made its way through all this time is because it spoke to something truly honest. Do do you find that when you're exploring folk music
I
or
think
traditions?
I think I do. Yeah, like I think there's something quite timeless about folk music. I think about, not just cultures, but or like in every society or culture, like there's always music in every group of society, and I think the music that came out of that, like each of these societies, is so unique and so ingrained within this group of people, and whether they came out of, like, for example, Korean, like a lot, like was like royal court music or whatever, but there's also, like more humble music that came out of, or like as part of the tradition, but or you can think about, like folk music, you think like singer songwriter stuff, but I think there's an inherent honesty about all this music that's not trying to be anything more than what it is. And I think that's something that's quite beautiful. It could be as simple as like just a single instrument and a singer. And I think the way that folk music is, when it's kind of broken down into like a few elements, but it has such strength inherent in it. I think that's what part of the reason why it's so timeless, and why it's still, heard and listened to and performed like years later, is because of that honesty and humility that's authentic to that sort of music and stuff.
Yeah. Your newest single, what what is the meaning of the lyrics being sung? Do you have a translation that you could share, or?
Yeah, I do. Yeah. I was like worked with my friends Sana Ali, and just like it's like kind of a like an imagery where it's like about kind of like an orchid, like it's a flower. It's like the trials and tribulations of that flower and stuff like
Wow.
that, and kind of like trying to convey, I guess, messages of hope and optimism and beauty. And yeah, I've always been drawn to those themes. I don't know, maybe it's because like I'm trying to be an optimistic person myself.
You're
But
quite the optimist,
I
I'd say
try.
so.
I try. I like. Yeah, it's not always easy, but I think with. I think a lot of it came a lot with, like, I watched this movie again with Studio Ghibli. It was the Tale of Princess Kaguya, and that was one of the most beautiful movies I've ever uh, watched, and not just with the artwork and the music, but the story, but like just like the message of just just beauty and this thing that was like growing. It's a tale. It's called like about like a little bamboo, like this princess, and it's like talks a lot about like fantasy elements and stuff like that. But
Right.
watching this person kind of grow, it was quite beautiful, and um, it gave me so much hope, not just in the sense that like it was, yeah, because I watched it during COVID. Maybe that was part of it, but it's just also like, there's so much, there can be so much shitty things in the world, but humans have this amazing capability of creating beauty,
Yeah.
even in like dark times. And I've was so like connected with that message and those themes, and that's, I think, what really inspires me when I write music, is to, you know, create things that are beautiful, even when maybe things are not, because it's something that we have the power to do, that every individual has to do, is create a bit of beauty and happiness in life.
I'd argue we all have the responsibility to do.
Yeah, maybe. I don't know.
I see no other alternative to move forward without, if not doing that.
Yeah, like, yeah, I guess, yeah, we have choices in our lives, like
Yeah,
the
we do.
choice of the maybe, you know, we can choose to be cynical or be, depressed. Maybe not depressed, I shouldn't say that. But we have choice to be, yeah, like, um, to not believe that things can be better. And maybe, yeah, and, or we can choose to do that, to try and make things better. If it's like people around us or world life changing things or world changing things,
Yeah.
we all, I guess, have that power to do that. It's not always easy. Everyone's different, but if we all in like our own little way, like try and make things around us a little bit better,
Yeah.
then why not?
I think the choice of believing things will not get better and things are just going to be miserable is actually wrong. Because if you were to take that to its farthest length, you'll find that the world hasn't ended yet, despite all of the capacity to have that in reality. That despite atrocious human suffering throughout our history, we're all still standing, that we still live, that you can wake up the next day forgetting even for a moment of all the troubles that you had the day before, whether it's because you're half asleep or you had a dream, that there's always breaks in the, I guess, the cynicism. But there's always going to be more optimism as time goes on, because every day that we live is life, and it's not death. And simply being alive to acknowledge that is a closer to honest truth than it would be to embrace the cynicism of things. So I'd argue that yes, there is a choice, but the people who would make that choice will soon find that their choice is wrong. Ideally, unless they run out of time, and then their time comes, unfortunately.
Yeah, yeah, it's really interesting. I Yeah, you you make the choices that you make, and yeah, I you just hope they're the right ones or they're positive ones, but maybe they're not, and maybe that means different to a lot of different people.
Yeah,
You
you're
can
right.
make something that may be like objectively bad, but it could be positive for you. You can argue that, and so again, maybe I guess where does the truth lie?
Yeah.
And it's like, is it true for you or is it true for everyone else? And I don't know if I have the answer for that, but I just try, I, yeah, I guess when it comes to making my music, inherently it comes from you. Because like we create, which should, well, at least what I believe in, when you create any art, you create one, I guess, maybe I don't know if it's selfish to say that, like you don't create for anyone else except for yourself, because I think there's truth to that. But at the same time, you're sharing it with people, because that's also too, because it has to connect with people, and if you make that connection at least with people, then you've done something, I guess, good. And yeah, I guess when I and when I write music, like again, yeah, it's true to me because I think it's beautiful. I hope that that beauty is resonates with people that listen to it.
I see it in a slightly different way, and the reason why I do so is because when I started to explore music, I did so uh, in isolation. I did so as a healing mechanism for myself at the time. So I picked up a guitar, wrote some songs, made me feel better about my life. And then I realized that there was joy in sharing my music and having that connect with people. But in absence of those moments, I was still left with the desire to create, but without that feedback, without that assurance that what I'm doing is connecting with people and therefore being positive. And I felt that the more I looked at it, the more seriously I considered doing these activities, that there will be more time in absence of that feedback than not. And I developed in initially perhaps out of desperation, but realizing that the power of it was developing a faith in serving music as like a deity, and allowing myself to simply create for creation's sake, allowing myself to feel as content with creating something for it simply just to exist, knowing that the potential is great for it to then connect with others. So it holds that space, and then holds that time in an equally, I guess, strong and clear way, acknowledging the potential for it to truly connect with people, which is perhaps the ultimate goal in creating, or perhaps a more positive goal, or goal that seems to resonate with both parties, the creator and the one to be shared with. But I often start, I end my responsibilities at the point of allowing the music to exist in the first place, because that allows me to, it holds like an infinite amount of space for me to then create more.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think that's interesting. Yeah, like I guess to add on to that, like it's interesting, like the human need to create, to build, like it's very. I think that's fascinating to me. I really believe that art is an extension of the human, of humanness,
Yes.
and that there's this need to express that. Whether, and yes, you do. It comes from you as the individual, and yeah, maybe yeah, you don't need that, always need that positive reinforcement that it has to connect with people. But I guess inherently it doesn't have to, because it comes from you as the individual. I think every individual has the ability to create and to be creative. I truly believe that. And so by putting stuff out there in the world, you're, yes, expressing an extension of yourself, but also inherently you're is extending as extension of humanity as a whole. Like everyone feels elements of happiness, sadness, melancholy, whatever. And these are all themes that are universal. And I think as artists, we draw on these because we need to put something, I guess, tangible, so that we can maybe understand it for ourselves, and maybe yeah, it brings understanding to other people. And I think that's a very beautiful thing. Is our responsibility as artists? I don't know, but it is something that's inherent, I guess, within art.
Yeah.
And yeah, that's something I believe in. At least.
Very nice. During COVID, I had time to explore other worlds. One world was I played Red Dead Redemption 2.
Yeah.
That game was fantastic. And perhaps it was in part of the environment, the situation at the time, where I was able to invest a lot of my attention into that. And I reflected early on why I was so drawn to playing this game at that time. And it was because I was working from home, as we're all kind of locked up. But this game felt like adventure to me. It felt like exploration. It felt like overcoming the challenges of this character, and being creative and connecting to little characters along the way, and appreciating landscapes that could have existed, that were meant to resemble what did exist, that allowed me to imagine and dream in an active position. The sense of adventure I felt in playing that game at that time, I still hold with me, because it kind of encapsulated all my adventures until then, and it helped me. It shined light on what I felt like what I was truly missing at that time, which was adventure. And as soon as things got rolling again in society, I, I guess I told myself that that sense of adventure is something I want to hold to my name, and incorporate into my life. And I realized I've been doing that this whole time with music, where whenever I pick up the guitar, it has the potential for an adventure. Music has brought me to places I never could have imagined. It has allowed me to create a story, and walk through a journey where I've connected to so many people, seen so many things, and have overcome so many challenges. And each time I recognize a world of which I'm trying to explore, whether it's a song, whether it's somebody else's music I'm trying to play, or a mix. I find like mixing is very much like a world in of itself. The challenges that I overcome are the challenges of adventure. And I acknowledge the having a guitar in my hand is truly a portable instrument, not just like technically and physically, where you can hold it, you can walk around, you can sing and talk. But I see it as a portable instrument because I can connect with people and I can go to places and connect with people with my instrument wherever they may be or wherever I may be. Um, and all of our instruments are quite like that, but guitar in particular, you can walk down the street and play. And because of that, I feel so empowered to embrace the notion of adventure with that in mind, where if I were to integrate myself in a culture or simply visit a group of musicians or of a society, of a people that has their music that they invited me to participate in, I'm now part of their folk tradition with my instrument. It could be, and no language other than music is necessary. That idea has been so forgiving and so unforgiving because it is very clear when you are not welcomed, and it's very clear when you are. And I think as musicians, we aim to be welcomed in as many musical environments as possible by respecting the music that is meant to be played or created or shared, especially if there's an invitation involved. But on the other hand, if we were to create our own music, how do we welcome others? And how do we not welcome others? How do we define what is welcomed and what is not welcomed? Where are our boundaries with our music? What do we define as right and wrong with the composition we're creating? How do we decide what chords are meant to be played, et cetera, et cetera? I think that discernment process is interesting to me because it limits the bounds of the world that we're trying to create, while at the same time opens up endless possibilities.
Yeah, that's very interesting. Yeah, I don't know if I have a definite response or answer to that, but you know, again, I think maybe we're going back to it, like drawing on like what we create and what we play music, what we do with musically, and who we share it with. We can't expect everyone to understand because again, like when we create something, it's a part of ourselves, and it's like like a page in our own book. And so, but yet again, we're expressing something that's very human. So I think there's that underlying thread that's consistent. Now it's like as like a chef or something like that, you could create like a dish, and like you can, it's like, oh, I put spaghetti and ice cream together. Like that's still technically a creation, that's food, but how many people will understand it or accept it is probably not a lot.
Yeah.
Because there are, I guess, not rules, but there are.
There's like palatability.
Yeah, there's a palatability maybe that some people might get and some people might not.
Yeah.
But maybe that's okay. Like, you create something that you hope everyone will appreciate, but also with the understanding that not everyone will. Because what we create as an individual in Toronto or wherever is different than what someone would create in, I don't know, like Tokyo, Japan, or something like that. Like there's a lot of different, like people how they're brought up and their understanding of the world and themselves and the people around them. Like
The flavors of different cultures
Yeah.
happen to be as part of the taste of where they are.
yeah,
And different people have different cravings, and our cravings can take us to regrettable places. But at the same time, we acknowledge that everyone has the hunger.
yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
I think yeah. So what do we do then?
Yeah.
Again, I think it comes back to the theme of honesty. You just do something that you believe is honest in yourself, and maybe it'll resonate with people, or maybe people accept it, maybe not, or maybe they will down the line, maybe when we're dead or something, like off like Mozart. So I don't know. But
Well, now we got like HD videos and photos of you, so that's very helpful.
oh, there you go. Yeah, that's good. Yeah,
Can't miss it. I love the idea of comparing music with, I guess, cooking
yeah,
and the chefs and all that. I'm a big fan of this YouTube channel called Eater. They have a specific playlist called Mise en Place.
yeah, yeah. I know.
You know, it, very good.
Yeah,
My chef, my old chef, shared that playlist with me, that video with me, and it inspired me to. For the first time in my life, I actually felt like a chef. I actually felt like I respected what I was trying to do, and not just work to pay my rent or my tuition, or to try to feed myself, whatever have you. In those videos, what was truly inspiring was the appreciation these chefs had for food, for the people, for their environment that they're creating. When they picked the herbs in their own garden, they treat it as if it's like a funeral. They treat it as if it's like a newborn baby. It's such a grounding acknowledgement of the sacrifice of nature, of the sacrifice of the people, the workers around them, that their dedication to creating something of beauty. Often people recognize that fresh ingredients make better food. Um, Maybe I can translate that to timings of things, where in music we can establish a environment of time and manipulate things within it. You know, thinking about recording and production, and maybe in a more organic way, hearing a symphony orchestra perform, that's happening all at once. Then there's only one chance at making it beautiful and perfect, perhaps. In the same way, I see chefs do that in their restaurants when they understand the seasonal organics, the process to bring out the flavors and see everything, shine everything in its best light. What's exciting about that is our lives are kind of like the dish being created 8 hours before service, where that slow cooked roast is what happens at Humber in the shed. And then when we finally get on the bandstand and we play, we serve it to our customers and say, "Hope, please enjoy." You know? But we will know before we even step on the bandstand if it's ready or not, because we understand our appetite, we understand our cravings, but perhaps we are yet to explore our palate and what truly satisfies us.
yeah, yeah, definitely. And that's, I think, that's quite a journey in itself. Like the audience, how will they respond to what you create, that you put your time and effort and love and sweat and tears into?
How has your audience perception been for your performances?
They've been positive. Like I've been really grateful for that. I'm glad that people are receptive to my music and what I create. I'm glad that they respond with like the joy and like a sense of like emotion that which is what I've been trying to convey. And I hope it continues. Like I hope I could spread that joy to more people, not in like an egotistical way and stuff, but like like sharing and like something that's beautiful, that's part of me but also not part of me.
Yeah.
Like it's something that's just like these are just things that already almost exist, and just putting a light on these things that are beautiful, like the sounds of the instruments, the melodies that I've chosen or created but are inspired by tradition, the people involved, the people themselves, like
Yeah.
they're amazing people. Who are very talented. It's like shining a light on them. I hope, yeah, it makes me happy when people are receptive to that.
Very nice. I'm very curious because you also work with this band Dwayne Gretzky, and they're like a pop cover band, right? Is that how you would describe them?
Yeah, like yeah, rock. They live in like kind of the 70s, 80s, like eras of cover music, but they've covered a lot of different eras.
Right. So they're like primarily a cover band, they cover a lot of different eras. Their audience is very different than your audience. How would you, what would you take away from experiencing what they do, and how would you integrate that to what you're trying to do in terms of their audience perception and like what the audience enjoys and
Well, I
all
think
that?
of it just like again, like the appetite of like a listener is like the appetite of like someone who wants to go eat and something. Like, you know, it all has its purpose, and like Dwayne's like, you know, they're a fun band. You want to party, and that's okay. There's nothing wrong with that. Like I have great times at Dwayne Gretzky shows, and I love working with them. And you know, with my music, like it's obviously not party music, but it maybe speaks.
I'd argue otherwise. I have a party whenever I go to your shows.
Appreciate it, thank you. But yeah, I just like, you know, I guess with my music, I guess it maybe calls for the listener to like listen and just sit
Yeah.
in the moment a little bit more, and not necessarily like move around too much. Just like try to like, it's like watching. Hopefully, at least try like it's like watching.
Maybe I'm doing it wrong because I move around a lot.
Yeah.
Especially your song "Frigate."
Oh yeah, that's
That
a well. That's
goes
a intense.
off.
That's on demands a little bit. But yeah,
Sorry,
like,
please continue.
no, it's all good. It's like I just want like yeah, to be taken to like somewhere else, and I think that's what music and art is you're kind of being brought to a different place.
Yeah.
And whether it's you just want to dance or party, or you just want to sit and just reflect, and like maybe the music calls for that, like that's okay. And so yeah, I think with my music, that's generally what I try to do is kind of take them to a different place,
Yeah.
and that place me yeah calls for just people chilling out or something like that.
Are the people in your life happy to go where you're inviting them to go? What? No, sorry, let me say that again. Are the people in your life happy to go? Yeah, yes. Are the people in your life happy to go where you invite them to go?
I think so. I hope so. Or maybe not, but like I don't know. Like you know, like with any music, not just my music, but any music, like it can bring meaning to different people. Maybe the message is the same, but they'll interpret it in whatever they want. And that's I can't control that.
Yeah.
And so if they're happy about it, amazing. If they're not, then it's like you know, I try to understand why, but it's like and judge from there, like is you know, and maybe hopefully, you know, try and again convey the message that's honest to me and true to me. And if that doesn't speak to them, then that's okay, I guess.
Yeah. The reason why I ask that is because you create worlds in your music, and you hope that your music can help others go to the world that you've created. But I also wonder if that can be reflected in other dimensions in your life. Where, for example, in inviting you over to my home, I've created a space that I wanted you to come to. But I also see this space as a reflection of my being, reflection of the values I hold, and the reflection of the creative potential that I aspire to share, where music happens in the same room, and so does my life. And I try to make an effort to establish a lifestyle or live my life in a way where I can bring my dimensions in alignment. And for me, that helps me define the music I try to create, and it further defines my authentic self, but also it gives me more space to hold those creative ideas and have more capacity to workshop through all of the trials and tribulations that come with the process. So that's why I share that or ask that of you, and wonder if you've reflected on that alignment of other dimensions in your life with the creative worlds that you create.
Yeah. I guess the goal is not to create, uncomfortable. Well, I guess with my music, it's not to make, people uncomfortable, but I guess to bring people into worlds that are familiar yet unfamiliar, I guess. And I guess I don't think I'm trying to challenge people
Mm.
with my music in terms of being able to interpret it or understand it.
Yeah.
But I think my always goal is, yeah, creating these like soundscapes or sceneries that are familiar, but in creative ways. I think that's what I realize is kind of like my artistic goal.
Mm.
And so, not there's, but I guess there is merit, for people creating art that's uncomfortable. Yeah,
Yes.
yeah, and that has value too. And like, it's like, oh, it's uncomfortable, like to listen or like view something that's not always like, yeah, the most comfortable thing to witness or whatever. But that's okay too, because I think that's, again, these are all, art is all reflections of
Hmm.
humanity.
All the good and the bad.
Yeah, exactly.
I definitely aspire for consciously with certain musics that I create to make the audience uncomfortable. And often when somebody listens to a song I create and they're like, wow, I felt really uncomfortable listening to that, I scream in accomplishment saying, yes, I'm glad you felt nervous. I'm glad you were sweating and felt anxious listening to that. It was meant to create that feeling within you because I think it's important to acknowledge the beauty in the darkness as much as it is in the light. And I think we can't have one without the other.
Yeah.
And I think this the sacrifice that I see, I guess the most meaningful, and maybe I speak for myself, maybe something that I aspire to explore and dig deep in is the exploration of the darkest parts of our humanity, and showcase that in music to some degree, because spending time in that dark world challenges me. It's like dancing with the devil. It's like flirting with death. It's but not making a mockery of it, respecting it for what it is,
Yeah.
knowing its profound power and destruction that can come from it. But I think it's an accomplishment to transform that darkness into something beautiful, because I think it can be without suffering the repercussions of what it's meant to be,
Mm.
where the darkness doesn't have to destroy you, it can just be acknowledged
Yeah.
and done so in a beautiful way.
Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah. Again, I think, yeah, need both. It's
Yeah.
that is that dichotomy. It's all aspects of like the humanness, and we can express that in beautiful ways and things that are not destructive or what they are. But I think, yeah, maybe it's building those spaces or worlds that it brings people to be able to acknowledge those things, but I guess in a way like the most healthy way,
Mm.
where it's not being um, expressed in like in destructive or unhealthy or violent ways, but in ways that we could deal with those things that we're feeling inside.
Yeah.
And but
I wonder, um, well, how would you describe your purpose?
I don't know. I don't know.
That's fine.
What is my purpose? I th- I think, I guess maybe I'll put it this way. Like, I have this need to create and be with music.
Mm.
Like, I realize that. I think it's an amazing thing, at least for me, because it's given me a lot of purpose in my life. It's like, oh, music's given me so much,
Yeah.
and I dedicate so much of my life to it. And because of how much joy it brings me in all these different ways. And so with that in mind, like, I guess my purpose in some ways is to create and try and create things that are beautiful in the way that I can, which is creating music.
Mm.
But that being said, you know, there's other things that I think are purposeful as well, as like cherishing like cherishing relationships, people around me, cherishing loved ones, seeing the world. That is purposeful, I guess, because I need to, yeah, like experience life. Maybe, I don't know. I don't know if that's a selfish thing or whatever. Or maybe my purpose is to be, try and be a positive person, trying to be a good person. But yeah, I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Perhaps you might consider describing you wanting to or needing to be with music as you needing to, I guess, be harmonious with music. For you can have all those, you can discover all of those meaningful things with and around music. It doesn't have to be one or the other, or
Okay.
trade off, or um, because I'm focusing on music, I lose focus on my friends and family,
Yeah.
or vice versa. I think there's a potential for a holistic view that I would argue to be, here's my bias, I guess, I speak for myself maybe, that I'd argue to be more productive than you may realize at first, in that when things align, that living a life with and through music is all those things that you find meaningful.
Mm-hmm.
Because doing so, well, I mean, a lot of your friends are musicians,
Yeah.
and a lot of your family appreciates and supports what you do with music. And music can take you to travel and see the world.
Yeah.
I mean, it already has when you went to Valencia for
Mm-hmm.
Berkeley, and who knows where else it'll take you. So I see it as they help all dimensions of meaning that you find in your life coincide. But I believe that music is the through line that carries us through all those things, weaving us from one place to the other.
Yeah.
And kind of enjoying that ride, I think, is the hard part.
Mm-hmm.
How can we enjoy something that is such a challenge, or can be seen as such a challenge, and how can we enjoy something that could be seem so selfish at times, or not, or how could we enjoy something that brings us such suffering when we're acknowledging the darkest parts of our humanity, or not. So it's quite the challenge,
Yeah.
but I also think it doesn't have to be if you just live with music.
Yeah. Very well said.
Man, it's wonderful to chat with you, Mr. Robert Lee.
Yeah.
I really appreciated all of your perspectives and sharing your perspectives on how you connect with music, and your Korean background with the music that you're creating now, and everything that we talked about, really. It's been very nice. Very nice.
Likewise. This was really enjoyable. Thank you so much for having me, man.
Yeah, man. Robert Lee, everybody. Hope you enjoyed this conversation. I definitely did. And thanks again.
Thank
Yes.
you.
Wow.